Sean Diddy Combs has been denied bail after the verdict in his sex trafficking case, and here's how he took the news. According to NBC News reporters in the courtroom, Combs appeared, quote, deflated as his hopes of going home were seemingly dashed as his lawyers attempted to convince Judge Aaron Subramanian to release their client ahead of his sentencing. In his ruling, Subramanian cited Combs' years-long pattern of violence as a reason for him to remain behind bars, adding that he continues to be a danger to others and unable to follow the law.
The courtroom was packed to the brim, every seat taken, every hallway outside crowded with people who wanted a glimpse of history unfolding before their very eyes. Reporters clutched their notepads, microphones ready, cameras rolling nonstop. Security stood firm, their expressions hardened, prepared for chaos.
That Combs, who pleaded not guilty to sex trafficking, racketeering conspiracy, sex trafficking by force, fraud, or coercion, as well as transportation to engage in prostitution, was acquitted on the three most serious charges of sex trafficking and racketeering, and only convicted of prostitution-related offenses. Defense attorney Mark Agnifilo insisted he should be released on appropriate conditions. As Agnifilo outlined, Combs would be willing to put up a $1 million cash bond co-signed by his mom Janice Combs, his sister Keisha Combs, and Sarah Chapman, the mother of Combs' eldest daughter Chance Combs, and have no access to his private plane, which is currently grounded in Maui. He also agreed to surrender his passport, undergo drug testing, and restrict travel to areas of New York, Florida, and California as necessary to attend court and meet with lawyers. According to NBC News, Combs was passing notes to Agnifilo as the attorney spoke to the judge to argue for Combs' release. After Agnifilo finished, Combs raised his hand and started to get up, seemingly to speak. Agnifilo told the judge he would find out what Combs had to say, and Combs' attorneys rushed to speak with him. Ultimately, he did not end up saying anything. Combs will remain in jail until his sentencing.
Well, Diddy is upping his offer to the government. He wants out of jail right now. You know that he is still behind bars at Brooklyn MDC while he is awaiting his sentence in October. But right after he was sentenced, they tried to get out on bail. They made an offer. They said, we'd like for him to be released on $1 million bail. The judge shut that down. So now it's like he's playing Let's Make a Deal, right? How about this, Your Honor? What if we offer a $50 million bail package? The money has gone up, but the reason that he thinks he should get out is because he says what he's convicted of were nonviolent offenses.
And he's right. He's right that he was convicted on 2 counts of the Mann Act. The Mann Act is hiring a prostitute and taking the prostitute across state lines. It's a nonviolent crime. So when you look at what happened, there were allegations that he was violent toward Cassie and Jane, during the prosecution's case.
There was testimony.
But the jury found him not guilty on those counts.
He was not convicted of those things. He was not on trial for being violent to them.
Well, he was. Because force, fraud, or coercion.
Forced to stay in the relationship.
But
forced to do the freak-offs.
But Charles...
And he wasn't convicted of that.
No, I know.
Right.
But there was testimony that, that Jane and Cassie were assaulted by Diddy. But
correct.
And had the jury believed that, they could have found him guilty.
Not necessarily. He can be assaulting them, but the jury didn't believe that they were forced to stay in this relationship, right? The jury essentially said they were getting plenty out of this relationship, and that's why we're not going to convict him.
Look, the bottom line is they didn't convict him
You guys
of
are arguing the wrong
violence.
point. The Mann Act, under the bail statute, you can argue what you think the law should be. Here's what the law is. Under the bail statute, it is considered a violent crime. We can say it doesn't include violent. The Mann Act, 18 U.S.C. 2421, prohibits the transportation of individuals across state lines for prostitution and other immoral purposes. This is called a crime of violence.
The air was heavy, so heavy it almost felt like no one could breathe. Everyone was waiting for one thing: the sentence. Diddy sat at the center of it all, dressed sharp as always, but his face betrayed what his clothes could not hide. The eyes that once glowed with confidence were sunken, darting left and right, restless. His hands fidgeted against the table, fingers tapping nervously in a rhythm only he could hear. Behind him, his legal team whispered frantically, stacks of papers piled in front of them, but even they seemed defeated, their voices low, their faces drained. For weeks, the trial had dragged on. For weeks, the evidence had piled higher and higher, testimony after testimony striking blow after blow. For weeks, the media had torn apart every detail, exposing cracks in Diddy's empire, revealing shadows he could no longer cover. And now, here they were.
When determining whether to detain a defendant on bail.
Right,
Oh,
on bail.
Counsel, wait a second. He just dropped code on you. He had the actual.
He's asking for bail.
Hold on. No, but the judge didn't allow bail for $1 million.
I know.
They were willing to put $1 million up. And by the way, you know as well as I know that and I'm not defending Diddy here. All I'm saying is, no, I'm not. I mean, Diddy should have been convicted in California.
Hold on.
But what I'm saying is, you know the Mann Act is not a violent crime.
I know what you're saying. I get it.
It's not.
But the judge has to go by the code.
So is this about amount? Is this about amount?
It's not about amount. So
it says on bail.
Once the violent crime, the defendant, the convicted defendant, has to prove by a preponderance of the evidence or convince the judge one of two things. Either, both, he's not a flight risk. The judge did not weigh not letting him out on him being a flight risk. There's no real evidence he's a flight risk, and that's what the money would go to. Is he willing to leave $50 million behind? He has an ankle monitor.
Right.
He's not really a flight risk.
Surrenders passport, too.
Surrenders passport. The other thing that Diddy has to show, the burden is on Diddy, is that he is not likely to commit the same violent act, the Mann Act, again. Diddy, remember, even though he knew he was under federal surveillance, even though he was about to be arrested, was conducting a freak-off.
So what you're saying is they will keep him behind bars pending sentencing because they're afraid he might have a freak-off with a prostitute.
Correct. He might traffic in prostitutes.
Actually,
right. And they hold him without bail. There are people who kill people who get out on bail. Again, I'm just saying what's right is right. And there are people who kill people who get out on bail after they are convicted.
Are you convinced that Diddy will not engage in a freak-off? I think he probably would.
Can I just say, if there's a freak-off where there is no violence, force, or coercion, I mean, do you care that much? Do you care?
I personally don't care. The law says what it says.
And that's why they don't prosecute under the Mann Act.
Look.
Because people don't care. They never would have prosecuted him if this was just a Mann Act violation. The only reason they prosecuted him was because of Cassie and Jane.
Right. The video came out of Cassie.
That's right.
That's why they prosecuted. Let's not forget, though, and the judge remarked on this.
Can we just call BS?
No, I don't think so. Look, the judge said during the determination not to give him bail the first time, 2 months ago or whatever it was, he said, Diddy's own counsel admitted in cross-examination that if we were here on a domestic violence case,
he'd be guilty.
Yes. So therefore, the judge said this. Your own counsel said that you were violent.
But that was about the Intercontinental.
Right.
And he had to admit that. It wasn't about what the trial was about.
But that's it. What we're talking about is violent.
That's the double-edged sword of them admitting. Yes, it helped in that moment. It helped them to make the case that, look, we're admitting what you're seeing on the video. We're not arguing that. But that can come back to bite you later, and now it has.
But then
you hold him.
Who cares? That's right. The judge said
hold
that.
on. You don't think that Diddy?
You do care.
There was
The only
evidence
thing that
submitted
matters
at
is what the
trial.
judge
9 years ago.
Hold on for a
on
second.
drugs.
That's not fair. That's not fair. There was additional evidence submitted at trial that was never no contrary evidence put up. That he also beat Jane 2 years ago.
Then what?
He's a serial domestic abuser.
So keep him in prison for the rest of his life for violating the Mann Act because of what you're saying.
No, the Mann Act is 1 to 10.
He's going to get out in a year.
The Mann Act is 1 to 10.
Well, you don't know what the sentence is going to be. Again, you're just assuming
I know what
it's
the
a year.
sentencing guideline is.
Just forgetting the law. If you're Diddy, do you want to get out of prison for 2 months just to go back?
And this is time served.
I get it. Nobody wants to be behind bars.
That's a good point. I think
you're going to get out and get a taste.
The final moment. The gavel about to come down with a thunderous finality. The judge entered, and the entire room snapped into silence. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade. Every camera zoomed in, every eye locked on the bench. The judge's expression was unreadable, stern, carved from stone. He shuffled the documents, cleared his throat, and then lifted his eyes straight toward Diddy. The pause was unbearable. Seconds dragged like hours. Diddy shifted uncomfortably, his lips pressing tightly together. He knew what was coming, but he didn't know how heavy it would fall. And then the words began. Calm, cold, sharp as a knife. The judge recounted the charges, the verdict that had already been delivered. Guilty. The words still echoed in the air, hanging above the courtroom like a curse.
In the Sean Combs post-verdict world is what's next, right? After being convicted of 2 counts of transportation to engage in prostitution and acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and 2 counts of sex trafficking, now we ask, what is his sentence going to be on those 2 charges, the Mann Act charges? And there's also another question that we're going to address today. Could he get bail? Could he get out? You might be saying, Jesse, wait a second. He was denied bail at every turn. And you would be right, he was. Despite proposing extensive bail conditions during the course of this legal saga, including a $50 million bail package and monitoring by private security personnel, the court was not convinced. Now, by law, the defense has the burden to prove that Combs is not a flight risk or danger to the community. And given the charges, the allegations, including that he was improperly trying to contact people in the case pre-trial, he was always denied release. But then there's what happened after the verdict last week. And this is an interesting conversation. And again, we're going to be speaking with Ira Judelson in a minute, who's been working with Diddy's team on possibly getting him released. But after the verdict, the defense applied for Combs to be released from detention pending sentencing. But that request was again denied by Judge Arun Subramanian. The defense argued, look, he's no longer charged with RICO. There's no longer presumption of detention. We have his passport. There's no access to private planes. There's no criminal history. This is his first conviction. He would be a fool to mess any of this up because he was just given his life back by the jury. He wasn't convicted of the highest charges. He was facing up to life in prison. Now he's not. He should be allowed to return to his property, his mansion in Florida. There'll be a $1 million bond. Now, the government argued, look, Sean Combs, he was convicted of serious charges, Mann Act violations. There was physical abuse in this case. There was prolific use and distribution of drugs. He committed crimes while under investigation, including having drugs in his hotel room when he planned to surrender to federal authorities back in September of 2024. And Judge Arun Subramanian denied the bail application, sided with the government, that these convictions on these charges, by law, they trigger the mandatory detention statute, that the defense conceded Combs is violent. They conceded that at trial, quote, we own the domestic violence. That's what the defense had said. The judge also made the point that it was impossible for the defense to demonstrate that he poses no danger, particularly given his violence after the searches of his properties and when he knew he was under investigation. That's the whole Violent Jane episode, attacking Jane, one of the victims in this case. And also that the evidence at trial showed there was a years-long pattern of abuse and violence. But despite the judge denying Combs' release once again, and given that his sentencing has officially been confirmed for October 3rd, that was agreed by both the defense and the prosecution yesterday, could he get out beforehand? It's an interesting question. Let me bring in right now a special guest. I am joined by one of the most renowned bail bondsmen, probably in the country, definitely in New York, Ira Judelson. Ira, thank you so much for coming here on Sidebar, and pleasure to meet you.
You too, Jess. Pleasure myself.
Let's talk a little bit about what you do. Talk about what you do. I don't know if everybody completely understands the process and your role in it.
You know, it's funny. Not a lot of people understand the world of bail. They think that a bondsman just raises his hand and you know, that's where it ends. With me, it starts with the people that you meet, the lawyers, the judges, the DAs, hearing about a bail, putting it together, which could take days, weeks, as in this case that we're talking about right now, Puffy. I started on this case going back almost 7 months ago when they brought me in as a consultant, because federal bail and state bail are two different things.
Guilty. The empire mogul, the music giant, guilty. But now came the punishment. Now came the years. The judge's voice deepened as he announced it. The sentence was long, far longer than anyone had anticipated, longer than even the most brutal speculations had suggested. The room gasped collectively, a wave of disbelief surging across the courtroom. Reporters froze mid-sentence. Some mouths dropped open. A woman in the gallery clutched her chest. But no one's reaction compared to Diddy's. His eyes widened instantly, his jaw tightening, his head shaking back and forth as if refusing to let the words penetrate his mind. His lips trembled, whispering, "No. No, no, no." His hands slammed against the table, rattling the water glasses. The cameras zoomed in on his face. A man unraveling live.
So I want to get more into this with Combs. There was a very unique bail package. And you didn't tell me if it was unique. $50 million, right?
Yes.
You know, the idea of private security. It was an interesting argument because who would monitor him. It was interesting because the prosecution at one point had said it's not fair, right? He's a wealthy celebrity who's providing a bail package that other people in his similar position wouldn't be able to provide. Now, the defense was like, well, the only reason we're presenting a package like this is because of what he's accused of and his wealth and his resources. We have to address that in a certain way. The reason it's so extensive is because of his wealth and resources. That bail package that was put forward was rejected by the court. What did you make of that?
Well, at that time, the judge was looking at the RICO Act and sex trafficking. So, Puffy was looking at possibly 25 years, or more, depending on what the guidelines were based on if he was convicted. So at 55 years old, at that time, it's almost a life sentence. So, and he has a lot of wealth and he had a private plane. So the judge was looking at that. Plus, in the federal system, they look at danger to the community. Where in the state system, they're not allowed to look at that. They look at risk of flight. So I think with all the letters behind that were coming in that we were not really privy to from a lot of the alleged victims, I think the judge made a decision that, hey, this is not going to be sufficient enough. I thought that at the end, he kind of, when we brought it on our private security team and we showed him who was going to be doing it, and we did Sam Bankman-Fried. So we knew that, we would be completely covered on that end. And we gave him the idea of there would be no Wi-Fi in the building that we were looking at, and that he would not be able to connect with anybody but his legal team and his family. We thought at that point that maybe we had a chance, but at the end, the judge denied it, and that's where we stood. And now on this case coming forward, after the convictions, after he wasn't convicted, at the end, we didn't know what he was going to do. So, when Mark reached out to me afterwards, we started thinking about putting another bail package together.
And what is that bail package and by the way, is this a bail package that you think could be submitted again even after the judge just denied bail?
Well, the judge denied bail based on the statute, and the statute stated a certain amount of information that part of the Mann Act that, was not eligible for bail. There are certain circumstances that can be done. We're going to regroup again. I know that they were going to go talk to Mr. Combs again and see what happens there. They have the October 3rd date. And, I don't know where he stood. As of the other day, he wanted to get out. I don't think anybody wants to be at MDC where he is. So, we're going to reconvene and see what happens, at a later date. We could go back with another package.
Would it require him to stay in New York? Would it be him to be? I know he wanted to go back to his property in Miami, Florida. And there's also an interesting question I think that his defense put forward. He just got his life back. That's what they said. He wasn't convicted of the top charges. He was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution, but he would be a fool to try to violate any of those conditions when potentially he may get a rather lenient sentence compared to what he was facing. So 2 questions there. Do you think that it would require him to be in New York as opposed to Florida? And do you think that he'd really be in a position to violate the conditions?
First question is, I can't determine what a judge is thinking. I don't.
His empire crumbling as his freedom was ripped away. The judge continued, unfazed. The sentence echoed again, pounding into the air like a drumbeat. Diddy's breath quickened, his nostrils flaring, his chest heaving. And then he erupted. He shot up from his chair, slamming both fists against the table, shouting words the microphones caught only in fragments. His voice cracked, a blend of rage and desperation. His lawyers jumped to their feet, trying to restrain him, whispering urgently, "Sit down, Calm down. But he wasn't listening. His anger was volcanic, spilling uncontrollably across the courtroom. Unfair, he bellowed. This is not justice. This is a setup. The gavel pounded furiously, the judge demanding order, but Diddy couldn't stop. His voice grew louder, his words more frantic, his hands trembling. The cameras flashed endlessly, capturing every contortion of his face, every crack in his composure. This wasn't the...
Well, after the monumental verdict in the Sean Diddy Combs criminal trial, the question now is, what is next for him, right? You got sentencing, civil suits, a lot to get into. So while Combs was acquitted of racketeering conspiracy and the sex trafficking charges that he was facing, he was convicted of transportation to engage in prostitution. Currently, sentencing is set for October 3rd. However, there is a hearing set for July 8th, where the defense will be arguing for the sentencing date to be expedited, to happen sooner. Obviously, they want that, considering Combs was also denied bail yet again, despite arguments from his legal counsel after the verdict that he should be released on bond. It didn't happen. They want to make sure this happens as quickly as possible. But what will he be sentenced to, really? That's the question. And also, will the government seize his assets? What about all of those civil lawsuits that he faces? Again, a lot of questions, a lot to get into. So for all of this, let me bring on former sex crimes prosecutor and criminal defense attorney, the great Matt Murphy is with us. Matt, good to see you.
Happy to be here, as always.
Got to ask you your reaction to the verdict. Is it what you expected?
Well, hearkening back to, I don't know, we were talking about this, you and I, a couple of months ago, and I got to say, whether it's fun to be right or not in a case like this, we were both right. This was never a good fit for RICO for a lot of different reasons. And the consent element regarding the sex trafficking was always problematic. And I thought the prosecution here did a good job presenting their case. They did a good job presenting their theory. But when you match in a trial context, when you match like professorial and kind of plotting, which is the way a lot of government lawyers are, versus dynamic and engaging and that personality of the defense, it's always a mismatch. You're always up against it. And the Mann Act, like we talked about, I thought he was going down on that after like the second day of testimony. The problem is for the prosecution, the Mann Act is a very old law, and it was essentially legislative morality from about 100 years ago, where it was transporting prostitutes across state lines. The intent may have been good. It was essentially a very early version of sex trafficking, but it was really more an attempt to stop prostitution, which is, as we know, never going to happen. So almost every lonely guy in New York City who's going through a divorce, who is having a problem in the dating pool, who has some sex worker drive over from New Jersey, if he buys her Uber or his Uber, theoretically, that's a violation of the Mann Act. So that is it's not the same type of crime. There's no mandatory minimum under federal law. The judge does not have to. That. Right. They don't have to. Now, it carries up to 10 years per event. So he faces up to 20 years. The prosecution, I think, is asking for 46 months or something like that. They're asking for far less than that.
If they had called, let's say, Christina Coram, okay, this chief of staff who had been mentioned, I think, by almost every witness, and she said, hey, listen, there was a criminal enterprise, okay? We were all a part of it. Everybody knew what the job description was. My job was to do this. His job was to do this. You think they would have gotten racketeering? If they didn't include Jane, who was arguably the more problematic testimony, I mean, Sean Combs still paying her rent, messages that she was setting up a lot of these sexual encounters. Cassie had messages too that were problematic that showed if we're talking about whether she was a willing participant or not. But if you focus just on Cassie and you didn't call in Jane, or you didn't call in a Mia, or you didn't call in a Brianna Bengolan, if you limited the case, and now it's so easy to play, Monday morning quarterback or armchair lawyer here, but do you feel that the prosecution could have won this case if they structured it differently?
Polished mogul the public knew. This wasn't the untouchable figure he had portrayed for decades. This was a man stripped bare, clawing against the inevitable. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Spectators gasped, murmurs spread like wildfire. Reporters scrambled to capture the moment live. Security moved forward, their presence firm, ready to intervene. Diddy's lawyers clung to him, begging him to regain control, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. He was too far gone, consumed by rage and fear. Finally, security closed in, their hands gripping his shoulders, forcing him back down. His body shook violently, his voice still cracking with protests, but the strength of the guards overpowered him. He collapsed back into the chair, his head dropping into his hands, his body trembling uncontrollably. The judge didn't flinch. He repeated the sentence once more, louder this time, ensuring every word was etched into the record.
If they call different witnesses?
That's a great question, and that's something that these prosecutors will literally be wondering for the rest of their lives, for the rest of their careers. They're going to be wondering if they'd done it differently, would the impact upon the jury and would the result have been different. The fundamental problem, I think, is that this was kind of always a round peg in a square hole. The arson, that domestic violence video that we all watched, that's horrific. All of that should have been prosecuted as state crimes in Los Angeles. That as a fundamental, starting point.
Well, they couldn't do it now. It was
Basically,
time barred.
No, of course, the statute is run on everything.
Yep.
But that would have been, he would have been prosecuted for exactly what he did instead of predicate acts into a RICO theory. Now, RICO, as we know, was designed for essentially mafia organization, for organized crime. And the idea is simply because there's a legitimate business, like in The Godfather, they had a legitimate olive oil importing business, and that was but it was still a criminal enterprise. The real thing was the mafia. The real thing was the organized crime surrounding the Corleone family, to use an example that everybody can probably relate to. So simply because their olive oil importing business was legitimate, that's not a defense to a RICO thing. That's the current state of the law. What they did here is they took a business that was always legitimate, Bad Boy Records, that was always and the purpose is to make music and make money. Everything surrounded that, and the defense argument, which they obviously argued very effectively, was that is not a criminal enterprise. So the very first element of RICO has always been problematic from the very beginning. You and I talked about that 2 months ago when this whole thing started, and and the jury, this was a sober jury that the questions were serious and direct. And, they sent that note out regarding juror 25 right at the very beginning saying, hey, this guy's not deliberating. And so this was a serious group. And the Mann Act, they did convict on that. So they were, by the fact that that it was unanimous meant that they were getting along. Federal juries tend to be, in California anyway, we have, they draw our state juries off the DMV database. That's how you get jury duty, is from the DMV. Federally, it's based on voter rules. So it's people who are conscientious enough to actually vote. And you tend to get a more serious class of juror in federal court, which I think is interesting. So to answer your question, it's something that we could kick around for years.
Sure.
But I think the fundamental problem here is that it was always kind of a misfit for a RICO theory. Just like the sex trafficking, sex trafficking requires fraud, force, or coercion, right? So that essentially is the same elements of rape. So you essentially, it's transporting somebody under circumstances that equate to rape. Is something forceful, something fearful. That it just doesn't fit very well here, especially when you're talking about all these people who they're orbiting him. They're all trying to advance their own career. And when the defense attorney got up and said, Cassie got $30 million as a result of her settlement, right? And that was a big move.
Yeah, I wasn't sold for that personally, because I was like, the prosecution came back and be like, she already settled. What's her incentive to come here and lie? What's her incentive to be a part of this? And that for me, but I think the messages, the conduct that arguably contradicts someone being a victim, and I know there's complicated factors between an abuser and a victim, the trauma, I get it. I totally understand it, but I wonder if that's what saddled the jury. Okay, I want to move past the verdict, because now we have to talk about what's happening next. First thing, when the sentencing hearing is going to happen. So they have this hearing next.
Into history itself. The years behind bars were confirmed. Final. Unshakable. Diddy sat frozen, his face buried in his palms, his shoulders heaving as silent sobs shook through him. The cameras caught it all. The empire that had once been built on power, money, and fame was now reduced to this. A broken man, his freedom gone, his legacy crumbling. The courtroom began to empty, the murmurs growing louder as people shuffled out, but the scene lingered. Reporters rushed to file stories, headlines already drafted, social media exploding with clips of his outburst, hashtags trending globally within minutes. Outside, crowds roared, some cheering, some screaming, some crying. The world had just witnessed the fall of an icon, and the reaction was instantaneous. Inside, his legal team huddled together, whispering about appeals, about motions, about strategies, but their words sounded hollow. Diddy's mind was elsewhere.
Welcome to TMZ Live. Harvey Levin here.
Charles here.
So we got some information. We broke this story a couple hours ago. Diddy is behind bars, but he is enrolled in 2 classes in jail. A class for drug abuse and one for domestic violence.
Domestic violence. These are programs that are offered by the federal government in the prison system for inmates, and he is enrolled in both of these programs. He's also, we're told, in therapy, separate from those 2 programs. And all of these things that he's doing, typically for one reason, to look good for the judge.
Well, it's important because sentencing comes up October 3rd. And Diddy, look, everything that I know tells me that he will get between 1 and 2 years. And I think it's going to be closer to 1. Prosecution is asking for 4. That's just not going to happen for a Mann Act violation. So if that's right, look, he wants to get the lowest he can get. And I think it's going to be between that 1 and 2 range. To get the 1, I think he's got to show the judge that he is taking his misdeeds seriously.
Right. And by the way, we know that even when the judge said that he was not going to let him out on bail pending sentencing, one of the things he mentioned was his violence. We've seen his violence.
Exactly.
So he knows that this is an issue for the judge.
And the defense conceded it.
Right. So that's something he definitely has to address. And that's what he's doing with this program.
I mean, Charles, he doesn't have to address it, but he is addressing it. And, this might help him with regards to his sentence. Maybe the judge might sentence him to lesser time because he's working on himself.
But Jamie, you know what the complication here is that he's been found not guilty on the charges that relate to drug use and domestic violence. That there was no conviction using force, fraud, or coercion in these 3 ways, and drugs. The Cassie video was off the table. The only thing he's been convicted of is taking a prostitute across state lines for the purpose of prostitution.
But can't the judge consider all of the testimony in the that was presented at the trial?
But the defense is going to say he was found not guilty on those things. So it's really kind of an interesting.
There's that, but there's another side of this. And Jamie, you've been working on this story for 5 days now to lock this down. But what was there was one key word, one of the sources you spoke to. You remember what that word was?
Yeah, redemption.
Yeah, because that's the other part of this, that this is Diddy looking at my life after prison, because now that he knows he's not going to be locked away for decades, not going to be locked away for the rest of his life.
He could get out this year with time served.
Wants to be able to do business, and in order to do that, for people to work with him, even in the entertainment field, he's got to show that he is changing, or he's addressing the things that everyone saw come out in this trial.
Right.
So this is about, part of this is also about what is my life after prison and how can I still be a successful businessman.
And it's interesting because we've talked about this before, that lawyers who represent people in positions like Diddy now, they have two responsibilities. Get them acquitted if you can, and what is their life going to look like after they get out?
Right.
And so there are 2 components, and this kind of serves
Both of those.
Both
yeah.
of those, yeah.
Hi, my name is Alicia, and I am from New Jersey. And I actually think it's a positive thing that Diddy is taking this step towards redemption. And
His eyes glazed, his hands trembling. He stared blankly at the table in front of him, replaying the judge's words over and over in his head. This was it. Years behind bars. No more private jets, no more sprawling mansions, no more red carpets, no more late-night parties, no more freedom. Just cold walls, locked doors, and the crushing reality of time. As he was led away, escorted by guards, cameras followed every step. His face, once a mask of confidence, was pale, drained, broken. His eyes darted toward the crowd, searching desperately for some sign of support, but all he saw were lenses, microphones, and the unflinching stare of a world watching him fall. The doors closed behind him, and the sound echoed like a final nail in the coffin. Outside, the media frenzy hit a fever pitch. Anchors repeated the sentence over and over. Commentators dissected every second of his outburst. Fans argued online, some defending him, others celebrating his downfall. The industry buzzed with shockwaves. Artists distancing themselves, brands cutting ties, associates suddenly silent. The courtroom became chaos. The judge struck his gavel repeatedly, calling for order, but Diddy's eruption drowned everything out. His voice cracked, a mix of rage and desperation pouring out. A man stripped of the power he had always wielded so effortlessly. The cameras...
Think, and this is my opinion, that the judge would let him out of the jurisdiction. I don't know. We can do private security down in Miami. We could also do private security in California, as we did with Sam Bankman-Fried. I would probably think that if the judge would think about possibly a package, that he would want us to keep him here. When we first put the first package together, going a few months back, we did have an apartment here in the city that I did scout out and located a brownstone in New York that was sufficient enough, which we thought, which was one entrance in, one entrance out, for our security to be there, and no rooftop, couldn't get out from any of the windows. So we could always go back and see if that's still available. I don't know if it is or not. So I can't determine what a judge is going to think. I don't think he would let that happen if he decided to make bail, but you never know. This judge was very fair to both sides in the trial. And as far as would he want to screw up what he, after being, the convictions not coming through, I think he got to be dumb to do something like that.
Right.
He is going to possibly get his life back. I don't know what's going to happen in the music world. I don't know what's going to happen in his regular life, but he's not facing the time that he was facing before that.
And I'm going to talk about sentencing a little bit later on. The private security, right, that would monitor him 24/7. The argument could be, and this is something the prosecution's put forward, how can we trust that he's not just they're not bought and paid for, they're not really going to watch him if he's hiring them, there's a conflict of interest there. What's your response to that?
My team is ex-law enforcement, all gentlemen that have been involved either in the Marshal Service, FBI, police, even some CIA. So again, my people would not risk their lives on something or risk their reputation or even possibly a criminal charge on something like this. So my guys are vetted. They've been doing this a very long time. So they wouldn't jeopardize anything like that. Now, when we first talked about private security, Puffy wanted some of his people. We denied that right away. It's our guys. It's my reputation on the line here. And that's when I went to court and Tony Rico and Mark Agnifilo both stood up and said, hey, Mr. Judelson is, his reputation's on the line here. He's been doing this a long time. I've bailed out Harvey Weinstein, Conor McGregor, Plaxico Burress, Cat Williams, Lawrence Taylor. So, I'm not going to put my reputation or my license in jeopardy, for X amount of money. To me, I'm going on. I might want to turn this business over to my son one day.
Yeah, the New York Times did a profile on you called Bailing Out the Stars. How are celebrities different? How are they different from other criminal defendants?
More demanding. When you get the phone call from the lawyer or whoever, a publicist, anybody. It could happen in the middle of the night. A celebrity does not want to spend an extra minute incarcerated. And, things change so drastically with, when I did Conor McGregor, he surrendered. He wanted out right away. Plaxico burst. When that happened, we were talking, and Mayor Bloomberg was involved allegedly in the situation, and Plaxico's bail went from X to X to X. And then I'm on the phone with his agent saying, hey, I need you to send me a copy of his deed for his place in New Jersey. And then with Dominic Strauss-Kahn, obviously, the world basically came to a standstill because he was the IMF, president, and nobody knew if he was on his way going back to Greece to lend him X amount of money to get him out of trouble. Yet we had to find him an apartment in the city. We had to get him private security. I was dealing with his ex-wife now, coming in and giving me what I need to put a $5 million bail together. So, they're a little more demanding, and everybody's looking to me to make that, make it.
Not at all. Every flash of anger, every drop of fear, every crack in the carefully constructed image he had projected for decades. The mogul, the billionaire, the untouchable figure. Reduced to a man staring at the end of his freedom. Across the courtroom, observers sat frozen, their eyes wide, their hands trembling. Some were shocked. Some were satisfied. Others simply couldn't believe what they were seeing. This wasn't just a trial anymore. This was history, playing out in real time. And while Diddy broke down in front of the world, outside the courthouse, the news spread like wildfire. The sentence was harsher than expected, the downfall more dramatic than anyone could have predicted. Crowds erupted. Some cheered, some screamed. Social media exploded, hashtags flooding every platform, memes already being created, headlines flashing across screens within seconds. But inside, the moment was still raw. Diddy sank back into his chair, his body trembling, his head in his hands. His lawyers whispered desperately, trying to regain control, but the damage was already done. His outburst had been witnessed by the world. His reaction had been immortalized on camera. The empire he had built was cracking before everyone's eyes, and there was no undoing it. It was the end of an era. The fall of a giant. Diddy had once been untouchable. He had once been the man who shaped the culture, who built empires, who moved in silence while the world followed his lead. But today, in that courtroom, all of it collapsed. No money, no influence, no connections could save him. The sentence was final, the judgment sealed, and the man who had once ruled the music world left in handcuffs, his cries still echoing in the halls of the courthouse. The cameras caught the last glimpse as he was shoved into the waiting vehicle. The door slammed shut, and the convoy rolled away. The flashes faded. The noise dimmed. But the weight of what had happened lingered everywhere. Diddy had lost it all. And the world would never forget the moment he lost control in court as the judge handed down the shocking prison sentence that ended everything.